This review of Star Trek Picard Episode 5 Stardust City Rag contains full spoilers. The link to the playlist with my reviews of the other episodes is in the description if you'd like to check those out as well. An amusing thing I noted in the opening recap is that pretty much all of last week's episode is skipped, except for 7 of 9 being beamed aboard at the end. Elnor is just stood there in the last clip with no explanation, as though the show itself knows that last week was absolute filler. Now of course they really focus on the things with immediate relevance to this week's plot, but it's tough to imagine much of the Vashti detour coming up again. We open this week on a very graphic scene of a man having his eye removed, probably the most gruesome thing shown in any Star Trek that I can think of. The missing eye thing was referenced in an earlier episode of Picard as a thing that the Borg do, which we had seen before in First Contact's comparatively restrained bits of gore, and is another of those weirdly specific snippets of Trek history that this show has decided to adopt and reference more than once. It seems that pretty strong violence then is another addition to New Trek to make it edgier, along with the occasional swearing which I've previously discussed. Trek has had its nasty moments, particularly in the movies. First Contact of course had various. The assassination of the Romulan Senate in Nemesis I found pretty shocking the first time I saw it. The Wrath of Khan's SETI eels in the ear scene is relatively tame now, but earned the movie a 15 rating at the time, and even the sonar facelifting in Insurrection I found pretty icky as a child. The Next Generation episode Conspiracy is the only major example that comes to mind from the TV shows, but for my money the most horrible scene in Trek was the transporter accident from the motion picture. Incredibly, this is also the only film that achieved a U rating in this country, meaning suitable for all audiences, and perhaps that's because the body horror is more implied than explicit, though the distorted screams and reactions leave you in no doubt as to what's going on if you're paying attention. It also helps that it's probably the best scene in the film, but that's a subject for another time perhaps. The main point here is that Star Trek now is quite happy to literally show a guy's eye being pulled out of his head and the optic nerve cut. These aren't Borg doing it, but rather people after Borg technology, and it wasn't until 7 of 9 came rushing in that I realised that the man was Icheb, the oldest of the rescued Borg children from Star Trek Voyager. Icheb's not necessarily what you'd consider a beloved character of the era, but anyone knowing the characters in their original setting will find seeing Seven cradling him crying as she euthanises him impactful. Cheap perhaps, but undeniably effective. Jerry Ryan's role in Voyager was as someone coming to terms with being a human being, at once both emotionally distant yet often pained, and she played that brilliantly, but so too does this short moment establish her as now emotionally expressive in a dramatic fashion. It does mean that the eye they were cutting out wasn't real, I suppose, but likely the replacement handiwork of the Voyager EMH, and that explains why the would-be optic nerve looked more like a cable, but it was still an all-round shocker of a scene. In fact, taken as a whole, the horror followed by tragedy involving these two characters we haven't seen for nearly 2 decades is probably the best single scene in Star Trek Picard up to this point, though perhaps like the aforementioned transporter accident, that has as much to do with the plodding tedium of the rest. The remainder of the teaser concludes with our first actual look at Bruce Maddox as he's escaped to Freecloud to meet the lady who's funding him to tell her his work's been destroyed by what he thinks is the Tal Shiar. I thought at first he was killed by the drink he was given, a glass of Tranya incidentally, a drink which first appeared in the original series episode The Corbomite Maneuver, making this teaser about as dense in fan service as you can get, only detracted from by the fact that much talked about Bruce Maddox is played by a different actor than originally. It turns out he's not dead though, but he's in a bad way, so the Tranya didn't do him any good. Picard and 7 of 9 share the first scene after the title sequence, and we learn she's one of the Fenris Rangers, the group who was briefly mentioned in the previous episode, as not having much of a grip on the law and order situation on Vashti and the surrounding area. It explains too why she intervened in the closing space battle last time, so it neatly fits together to explain what she's been doing and how she's here now. It's only taken a couple of scenes for Seven to have been much more interesting than old Picard has been all this time. She appeared in the trailer asking Picard what the hell he was doing out here, suggesting she'll have become a generic speaking action woman. But there are suggestions of the Voyager 7 of 9 in her, most overtly when she replies that she's functional when Picard asks her how she is. A little more cringe is her downing a glass of bourbon in one, a trite trope to tell us someone's tough, but it's an overall triumph of a scene and Ryan's performance is excellent. Indeed, it's enough to make you wish they'd made Star Trek 7 of 9 instead. The ship arrives at Freecloud where they get some targeted spam in the form of cartoon holograms. I've likened the holographic interfaces they use now to Minority Report previously, and now this bit puts me in mind of Spielberg's AI. It's charming and there's a surprisingly cute moment when Elnor's a little disappointed that he didn't get one, and he has a few similar moments in the episode that show his character's going to be one of quiet naivete. You have to wonder though whether the ship's firewall needs updating. Had the Enterprise shown up at Freecloud, would a hologram of a comedy doctor have started dancing around the bridge offering Geordie new eyes, or one of a barber offering Riker a beard trim? Well, probably not actually, we all know what kind of thing they'd have offered Riker. The episode's villain is explained as Bjayzl, who we saw in the teaser not quite killing Maddox, and who is always after Borg parts, and also who is yet another overly silly name in the show. Bjayzl sounds more like something Picard's Romulan housekeeper Laris would exclaim if surprised. The plotting has contrived the underworld culture they're engaging in such a way as to make Rios wear a daft costume, like a pimp. We also see Picard is wearing what initially put me in mind of a more velvety Nick Fury cosplay, what with its eye patch, though later he puts a beret on too, which removes that association, even though it hardly makes him look any less stupid. Freecloud itself looks a lot like the city in AI with its neon debauchery and holograms. It might be like Blade Runner 2049 as well, but I only saw the trailer for that. As they develop, things are shown but also explained earlier in back and forth scenes for this part, like one of those heist movies. It's stylish and entertaining though if you can get over Picard and Rios looking so daft, and additionally Picard putting on a caricature of a French accent and all around behaving like he's auditioning for Allo Allo. The plan is to convince Bjayzl through the intermediary of her over-designed reptilian Unkar Plutt-looking henchman to trade Maddox for Seven, even though they won't really be trading her of course. Quark from Deep Space Nine also gets a mention as one of Rios's references. Raffi, meanwhile, has her own subplot as she beams down to see her estranged son. It's not anything that's particularly interesting, but characteristic now of Raffi, the actress makes it compelling enough by acting for all she's worth. We learn that obsession over understanding the real truth behind the synthetic Mars attack is part of what ruined her life, which likely explains why she was so amenable to go along with Picard when he said secret Romulans were operating on Earth after first pointing a gun at him. The resultant standoff with Bjayzl sees Seven grab her by the neck as she explains what happened with Icheb. Picard evokes his old pompous persona as he implores her that murdering Bjayzl in revenge is bad for some pompous Picard reasons. This is the same Picard who snapped the Borg Queen's still living spine incidentally, killing her once and for all when she was entirely at his mercy. Even though they're still surrounded by several of Bjayzl's guards, rather than merely drop their weapons when instructed, they helpfully threw them so far away that they're rendered inaccessible, so that once Seven lets go, Bjayzl offers Bruce Maddox in exchange for her own life. After they beam up to the ship with Maddox, Seven says goodbye to Picard, but then she beams down and kills Bjayzl anyway, which is good because it sticks it to Picard's sanctimonious tripe. I'm firmly on Seven's side. Bjayzl is responsible for torturing people by cutting into them without anaesthetic to extract their implants and likely killing most if not all of these people in the process. And among these people was the closest person Seven had to family. I'd call that worthy of the death penalty, but in lieu of that legal framework, delivering it in person will do. It also means that it won't be done to anyone else now. Best of all, her death means I hopefully won't have to say Bjayzl again. We leave Seven shooting her way through guards at the bar. It feels like that will be the last that we see of her, though I hope I'm wrong. It's referenced that her and Bjayzl have a deeper history than what we've seen, with Bjayzl even knowing Seven's real name Annika, so perhaps that's there to build on later. Even though her appearance amounts to one episode plus the very end of the previous one, 7 of 9 has been the best part of Star Trek Picard so far. Battered old Bruce Maddox gives Picard the info dump he needs, that Soji is Dahj's twin sister and is on the artifact, and then Rios asks Picard, are we going to talk about our stowaway? I hoped for one moment that Elnor had found a cat on Freecloud and taken him back on the ship, but really he just meant that Raffi is back aboard, which is fine and all, but a cat would have been nice. It turns out to have been good that Picard asked Maddox what's going on when he did, because then, for reasons we don't know, Dr. Jurati decides to switch his life support off and he dies, and considering we've spent all this time waiting to finally see him, that definitely counts as something happening. It also explains why she was so keen on coming along. It gives this episode a theme. We opened with Seven killing Icheb out of mercy to prevent his prolonged agony, and we ended with Jurati killing Maddox, who she was very close to. They were seemingly lovers, judging by a video she watched of them together earlier in the episode. And she did it for reasons that we don't know, but it's hard to envisage they could possibly be justifiable. And in between we have the disagreement between Picard and Seven on whether to kill Bjayzl. It gives us a case of killing for a good reason, a case of killing for a bad reason, and a case of killing for an arguable one. And yet it's only the arguable one that's to a villain. Jurati's reason, I expect, is that she's doing it on orders from Commodore O. We did see them meet in episode 3 in Jurati's last scene before she arrived at Picard's chateau to tag along, though the real mystery is what could entice her into killing a man she loved, and considering her wistfully watching the video of them together in this episode, still does. It's between Remembrance and Stardust City Rag for the best episode so far, but I think I give the nod to this one. Its main subject was 7 of 9, and they got her right, and though some of the stuff on Freecloud was a bit contrived and far-fetched, the right boxes were ticked emotionally and dramatically. As a bonus, we didn't have any of Narek or Soji or their shenanigans. I hope that doesn't mean we're in for a double dose of them next week, but with the Maddox part finally over, the storylines look set to converge anyway. It feels right for 7 of 9, who was enunciated in Voyager episodes, such as 1 and Bliss, as fearing not fitting in with humankind upon the ship's return to Earth, to have become one of these Rangers committed to helping the innocent and combating crime as best they can, despite the absence of a legal jurisdiction. She tells Picard in their final scene together that she works every day of her life on regaining her humanity, so that's clearly the feeling that being a Ranger and helping others gives her. It also fits her old exasperation with and ignoring of Starfleet protocols when she saw them as unnecessary hindrances. Picard, very much the Starfleet man, except for that one stupid film where he wasn't, struggles to countenance acting outside of an established and understood framework. We saw this when, upon resigning from Starfleet, Picard ended his efforts to evacuate the Romulan refugees, even though Raffi said they should continue to try. This contrast between Picard and Seven comes up at the start of this episode when Picard expresses ambivalence about the Rangers and what they do, and I think the same issue is implicitly expressed when it comes to killing Bjayzl. Picard frames his objection to Seven killing her as saying revenge is bad, but the alternative is that no justice would be enacted at all. Seven would know this and has likely been faced with the same choice between either ad hoc justice or none whatsoever many times as a Fenris Ranger. The distinction between revenge and justice can sometimes be a matter of who's conducting the same act or the authority they claim to have in doing so. While there was an obvious and deep personal dimension, Seven's killing of Bjayzl would be the only possible opportunity available for some sort of justice. For Picard, justice is either delivered via institutions or it isn't justice at all, and even then they need to be monitored for standards, as in the Next Generation episode The Drumhead. For Seven, living a life away from the comforting moral certainties of Starfleet and the Federation, justice can only be done on an interpersonal level. The alternative is not only no justice, but that perpetrators are allowed to carry on committing their crimes, creating more victims and more misery if they're not stopped. Just another minor nitpick, it bothers me a little that the phasers are only ever shooting individual bolts like Star Wars blasters, but it is 20 years in universe since Nemesis, so I can accept that's just the style of guns now. I think that has previously been used as a setting where needed, but it seems to be the only one now. Of course, the reason is that it makes action quicker, firing bolts rather than a single beam that stops and starts, and with that in mind, blaster style guns are the most logical for combat anyway, probably. But it is one less distinctively Star Trek thing in this supposedly Star Trek show. I did in the review of the third episode called Bruce Maddox a wild-eyed boy on Freecloud, though I didn't think actually it was a direct reference to the song, but here we see the city's called Stardust City as well. Both are very un-Trek-like names, so it looks like someone thought it was a good idea to plunder the David Bowie back catalogue for inspiration. Perhaps the ultimate villain will turn out to be Major Tom on Black Star. There's almost a matter of relief with this episode. So long as the show was coasting along and nothing was really happening, its non-committal nature meant it could only be a mediocrity. Once it eventually made the leap into really doing things, then it would be either good or bad. Star Trek Voyager would probably call that Schrodinger's quantum or something. This episode then, despite its ropey parts, really was good dramatically and the one thing it really had to get right. It brought back 7 of 9 and really did justice to her character. As a strong critic of other recent things such as Discovery or the Abramsverse or Disney Star Wars or modern Doctor Who, to have 7 of 9 brought back and done well is not only a relief, it's also an actual surprise. Next we'll have to see whether they can keep up this quality as they develop the show's own story, beyond doing right by one classic character. But Stardust City Rag leaves me more optimistic now for the coming episodes. Thank you for listening. Do please like and share if you've enjoyed it. Leave me a comment to let me know your thoughts, and if you feel I deserve it, it would mean a lot to me if you'd subscribe. We're at the halfway point now with Star Trek Picard, so things will surely really be happening from here, and after such a relatively good episode, this is the keenest I've been to see what happens next. I will be back next week with the review and analysis of the next episode, The Impossible Box. Links to all the Headhunters Media social media are in the description, and there is also the Discord server if you'd like to swing by for a chat. This is Jonathan from Headhunters Media, and I hope I'll catch you again soon.